how do you manage a class of kids post pandemic who may or may not come from trauma, who, we can't teach the way we did 10 years ago. We can't teach the way we did 4 years ago. Like, we have to continue to keep up with our kids.
Welcome to the Mindset on Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Truelove, and I'm excited to bring to you all another episode. As you know, here, we're all about building more confident, resilient, and mentally strong communities. And our guest today is a pro at just that. She is an educator. She is an author. She is a two-time, not one, got that right. Two-time TEDx speaker, and she's an overall amazing person. And I'm excited to have a conversation with her today. None other than the most amazing Miss Katie Kinder.
Hi, everyone. Oh, my goodness, Daniel. I'm so excited to be here. Daniel Truelove. What a name. Like, I'm already into it. Like, is that your given name?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, it is.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, I get that often. I didn't really know that my name was as unique as it is because I come from a very small place. My obviously my entire family has that name, and everybody grew up around us knowing that that was our name. It wasn't until I went to college and people questioned if that was my real name, and I was like, why would I be making up a fake?
Certified. Like, I went back and got certified and walked into a room and I didn't have any strategies, none, zero. And then I was wondering why my kids were eating my lunch, like they were bored. I was teaching the way that I had been taught, which was straight up out of a textbook and, do the questions in the back of the book. And that's just not the way. So I just started just like eating up anything I could get my hands on. I would go watch the teacher of the year. I just would go to all the PD that I could go to and learn, and started just like getting better and getting better and getting better. And that's how we I call my baby teachers, my new teachers. I love them. And yeah, so I did that. And then I had somebody ask me to do an outside conference, like just do a breakout. And I was like, okay. So I did a breakout, and people would like get in line and be like, you should write a book. And I'm like, yeah, you should write a book too. And so then I did. I released Untold Teaching Truths in 2021. And then from there, it's just led to me speaking all over the nation, speaking to teachers, loving on the teachers. And that's what I'm doing full time now. And it's really fun.
Tell me what do you talk about when you talk about on these untold teaching truths? Like, is it just like the realities of education, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what really my number one thing that I get all over the nation is how do you manage a class of kids post pandemic who may or may not come from trauma, who, we can't teach the way we did 10 years ago. We can't teach the way we did 4 years ago. Like, we have to continue to keep up with our kids. And you have to love your kids enough to never say things like, well, we've always done it this way. No, like, we have to keep up. That something that we read 20, 30 years ago shouldn't necessarily still be in our curriculum. Like, we have to put things in front of kids that they are going to connect with. And we've taught our kids, right, to question and so when we hand them something, it's like, well, do it because it's for a grade. Well, they're Gen Z's like, maybe not. And like, what does the workforce look like today? And what, I mean, no longer are people working for 30 years, 40 years, retiring at the same company. And like, no, people are entrepreneurs. They are doing all kinds of different things. And we have to keep up with that as far as school goes.
No, absolutely. You mentioned something that is very important to me, but it's also foreign to some of those that have actually been in education for a long time. You said question. So you know, my parents are older. My father was 45, I believe, when he had me. So we come from like an older school generation, and that was like you go up there, and what those teachers tell you do it. But now you mentioned questions. You'll question things like so. Some people may fret when you start talking about that. No, it's do as you're told, and Gen Z is they're not operating that way. So there are challenges in the classroom as it relates to that. So tell me a little bit more about what are your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, okay. So I teach my kids to speak because some of our kids are coming to us without the ability. I mean, they're tech addicted. They don't know how to have like appropriate discourse. And so I think it's kind of part of our job to teach them how to speak in this like professional setting. And my kids, I don't know if you've ever been a part of a Socratic seminar, but they're really cool. And I have all different ways that I teach my kids how to speak to each other. Because you should be able to have a respectful disagreement. And you should be able to say, I want to push back on this. And I respectfully disagree. And, my kids are 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And sometimes they come to me without the ability to do that. And so I teach them that in a Socratic seminar setting. And I even got to go into a college just last week and teach some college kids how to have a Socratic seminar. And it was awesome. And these kids were like, well, we thought you were going to be some boring speaker that came in and we were just going to not listen to you. But this was fun. And I think that they need that skill. And so that's what it looks like for me. And we start small, like when I say, oh, if you disagree, that's great. Just say, I respectfully disagree. And this is why. I mean, we just go back and forth because if you throw a desk and tell everybody that they're dumb and run away, you don't win, you don't get the job, you don't. So let's learn how to do it and let's learn how to do it right.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What I love about that the most is that you collaborate. And I think the classroom has a great opportunity to be a collaborative environment if you allow it to be a collaborative environment and it's not a dictatorship to where it's like, I say this because I think that in this is a leadership tool that when you have kind of like individuals within the organization, whether it's a school, no matter what it is, that are bought in, that feel like they have some type of ownership with decisions, ownership with where we're headed, then they're more likely to move with you versus friction and moving in the opposite direction. And so I feel like the way in which you've structured things allows for you to have a classroom that is more bought into the kinder way of doing things.
The kinder way, I love that. I, I like that. I'm gonna hashtag. Yeah, no, I think, so in school it's called cheating and in companies it's called collaboration. Like we should be leaning in to collaborating. And I understand that there are high stakes tests and they're not going anywhere. But there are some cool things that you can do. You can wrap curriculum around some really cool things where when they do sit down, they are so much more than a test score. We know that. And I think that sometimes in the pressure of testing, that sometimes our principals and our teachers, we forget that we're going to be graded on how my kids perform. And so I better make sure, but they're not going to perform well unless you put stuff in front of them that they buy into. And my kids, I mean, by the time it is high stakes testing, April, May, if I'm like, okay, you guys, you have got to do your best for these 3 hours, it's going to be awesome, blah, 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 they don't want to let me down. They are going to sit and do that test. They don't necessarily love it, but they're going to do well because they're a reflection of me. Because by the time April and May come around, we have a family classroom. Like we have each other's back. It's not easy. It's sometimes messy. It's human, but absolutely, like our teachers have got.
Mhm. Well, I think the thing that allows for you to do that is this principle that you have. And I know that you speak about this often, and it's called relate then educate. I love it. I love it. I speak as well, and that's something that speak on about cultivating relationships and the importance of that. Tell me a little bit about your theory on and how you've utilized this technology, not this technology, but this technique of relating to your students and then educating them.
Sure. So first off, just a shout out to there is a company called Relate Then Educate in Tulsa that I'm kind of a part of, and I speak for them, and I go out and they do some really awesome things, and they get these stories from teachers and they pour into teachers. And so Relate Then Educate, I heart you. Yeah, no, I think that you have to care about them as people before you see them as a warm body in your class. You have to, and it's hard because I mean, my biggest class I ever had was like 38 kids in a classroom built for 25. I mean, let's talk about that. That is not easy. And if they're 12, 13, 14, they might not have deodorant on. I mean, let's just be real. And yeah. And so it's not easy, but I think really pouring into your kids on day one, learning to say their name correctly. That is one of my biggest. Like you say their name and you say it right. I just, ugh, that's a huge thing for me. And then you have to care about them. They should be writing. You should be responding to them, talking. All of those things allow you to relate to them first. And I think part of being vulnerable as the teacher allows kids that vulnerability. So, not that I share all of the things about my life, but I mean, I do share about my daughter who lives with special needs. I do share about losing my best friend at the age of 34. I share those things. And when I share, then they are more likely to do the same.
Absolutely, and I agree with you 100%. Um, I think it's challenging because vulnerability a lot of times um, means you have to display that everything's not okay 100% of the time. You have to be a human, and for a lot of kids, they don't see the human element of their teachers because they see you as this perfect person. You don't do anything wrong. You've always done everything right. They made up this facade about you in their head, and now if you don't break that down and make yourself real, then they'll continue to operate based on the picture that they've created of you. And our vulnerability is an amazing way for you to be able to do it. And I love the fact that you speak about that. But I think it's so important because one of the things that I am excited just to dive deeper in with you is because you talk about like this resiliency as educators. 50% of the new teachers are leaving within the first 5 years of education. And so if we aren't able to have these practices or understand certain things that you speak about pretty often, then who are we going to have to educate our babies? And so, how can we now have more teachers that understand how to overcome the challenges of education and continue to move forward and progress as an educator and stay committed and locked in to what they obviously wanted to do.
Sure. Well, number one, knowing that this is messy human work, you can have a kid blow up your classroom has nothing to do with you. And a lot of times behavior that you don't want to see, behavior that is disruptive isn't about you. Like it's don't let a 12-year-old hurt your feelings, right? And which is hard because we love them. And I say to them a lot, like, I love you too much for this, and you know it. And they're like, yeah, 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 that's right. But You can't allow a 12-year-old to hurt your feelings. That prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. I think they say now that boys, they're not fully developed until they're almost 30, girls 25. And so I think you have to remember as the adult in the room that these are adults in training and they need a lot of help. And I think showing up every hour, showing up every single day, and continuing to show up and being a study of the craft. Like, one of my favorite things is to go and watch other rock star teachers in action and be like, oh, that's cool. And like take their idea and maybe change it for what I'm doing, and the kids that love it. Like, we should be leaning on each other. And sometimes in teaching, we shut our doors, we're in our four walls, and we feel alone, and we shouldn't be. We should be leaning into the community school.
I love that you talked about like this collaboration in your. I refer to your TED talk because I love it so much. So uh, you refer to like this collaboration takes place, and I would love to get into kind of a story that you shared in your TED talk about one of your students. But you talked about how there would be times to where it would maybe a principal, assistant principal, another former teacher, they would kind of utilize the connection
But I think, when you pull up everybody's data in a one room, and you put a bar graph up, or this it just feels like a vulnerable place, because it is a vulnerable place to be. So I think if we can break that down, and I have worked in schools that are amazing at having this collaborative community type feel. Like, I had a guy on my team for years, Coach Terry, and he was the history teacher, I was the English teacher, and we like good cop bad cop so many kids into success. And like, he's a football coach, and I would mother them. And then like, and we it was like, don't make me send you down to Coach Terry, you already know. And he's like, oh, that's true, true, true. Same thing, like, don't make me send you down to Mama Kinder. Mama Kinder is gonna she gonna look at you in that face, and you're not gonna be able to handle that. You're gonna start crying. So I mean, I just think that we need to have buddy teachers. We need to be leaning on each other. And I think that's one of the reasons we're losing teachers, is because they feel alone. They feel like they don't have anywhere to turn, and then they quit. And so I think it's really important. Yeah, even my principal, if I have a super special connection with a kid like Marcus in my TED talk, my principal would even be like, don't you make me go get Miss Kinder. They'd be like, no, I'd rather you call the police. Like, for real. We can't handle that phase. And I think that that is really important, to step outside of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Now, before we go into the story, tell me a little bit about, for context's sake, what type of school setting are we talking about? Title One? Is it, super diverse, not diverse? Like, what type of school setting that kind of gives, a better idea about the setting of what you were working with your students?
My students it's 100% free and reduced lunch. They are extremely diverse. My student population comes from the third most violent neighborhood in Oklahoma City, and they won't even deliver pizzas there. And don't get it twisted, my students are smart, and they are wonderful and beautiful souls that find themselves oftentimes in this cycle of poverty, in which it's really hard to get out. And the only way out is us. It's educators, it's education, it's all of us banding together and helping them get out. And I have helped so many students be their first one in their family to get to college. I sit and help them write applications for grants, for scholarships, I mean, that's what we're called to do, right? Is to help our kids get out of this poverty that they find themselves in. It's not their fault.
The thing I love is that you can tell that you care. And um, that matters to me because and I share this with you, but I at times had this kind of a sense that some educators didn't care. It didn't matter to them as much as matters to you, and I think because of that relationship, you were able to make an amazing impact on the lives of many students, and so tell us a little bit about this student that that you shared in your TED talk.
Sure. Uh, God bless him. I'm still very close with him today. So yeah, by October in my class, we are done with procedures. Everybody knows how I expect them to act. They know that we're going to have some fun, but we're going to work hard. Like October is when it starts to get really good for me as a teacher because we can really get into some really cool collaborative project-based learning. And my counselor came in and brought me, it was like 4 o'clock. I had happened to be staying late, getting ready for the next day. And she came in with this giant folder and plunked it down on my desk and said, "You're getting a new student." And she was like, "I implore you to read about him before he comes. And he's coming to your second hour." And I'm like, "Are you sure?" And so I did. I sat down and read about him. And he was just, I mean, some of the things that I read about are just horrific that I can't even say to you. Abused in every way imaginable, homeless, been kicked out of every foster home. He was sent to a boys' home, and it was going to be his first day the very next day. And his name's Marcus. And he came in that first day and he was just mad at the world. He was just so mad. 6 foot, 200 pounds. And he walked in and I was like, "Hi, oh my gosh, we're so glad you're here." And like, he looked at me like, "Mm-mm." And I said, "This is your assigned seat right here on the front row." And he said, "Well, I don't sit in the front." And like my seventh grade babies are like looking back and forth, like, "Oh my gosh, what's she gonna do?" And then of course in my heart and head, I'm like, "What is she gonna do?" And and so then I said, "Well, in my class, you're gonna sit in the front right here." And he said, "Make me." And I was just like, and so on his very first day, I said, "Well, why don't you step outside and let's talk?" And so I got the class going and I stepped out there and he was just determined to hate me, determined to hate and get kicked out. And it was just such a, like, how am I going to get through this wall of steel to his heart, you know? And I said, "All you have to do today, I'll give you an A for the day. You don't have to do anything else, but I'll give you this full size candy bar and it's going to be on your desk. All you have to do is sit in that desk and then you can eat the candy bar, you can not, it's whatever." And he looked at me like, "I don't know about this lady." And then I left and hoped for the best. And 60 seconds later, he comes in, sits down at that desk, eats the entire candy bar, puts his thumb in his mouth, puts his hoodie over his head, and went to sleep. And I just like looked at him like, this is a little bitty baby trapped in a giant body. Like that's how I looked at him that day. Like, oh, and I was just gonna love him into submission. And it wasn't easy. Like we went back and forth every single day I showed up. We had a resiliency. He showed up, I showed up. He was never absent. And then he started to laugh and smile, and it was the place that he had stayed the longest. And he just started to like almost imprint on me like I was his school mama. And I would have him sometimes all day because other teachers were just like, "Go see Miss Kinder, I can't handle it." And even my principal would be like, "Don't make me go get her." And we would 2 steps forward, 18 steps back, 2 steps forward, 12 steps back, like back and forth. And yeah, on his last day of school, he sobbed all 6'4", 250 pounds of Marcus and my shoulder sobbed. And he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave school. He didn't want to leave me. And I just promised him that I would help and I would be at his I would be at his sporting events. I would help him with essays if he needed me, if he needed to come to Thanksgiving, which he has. Um, all of those things that I would help. And so I did. I helped him get into college. He got a scholarship, run track, and he graduated. Now he's working a full-time job and doing great. And I also want to say that's not just me, right? That's not just me. Like, we all have those kids that need us that way. I don't connect with all of my kids that way. I need the teacher down the hall to do it. I need Mr. Truelove downstairs. I need him to do it. I need everyone. And our kids need everyone. And so that's my Marcus story. And our Marcuses of the world, they need you so much. And so you guys show up, be resilient every day.
I appreciate that so much because I had challenges.
Kind. I mean, saying that too, like, we're going to be kind. I'm also going to put people in front of them that look like my students. I'm a white lady from suburbia. Like, I drive a minivan and I don't look like my kids. And you better know that I'm going to have people that we are learning about that look like them, that represent them. And they just start to trust. And that is what we have to do. We have to care more about who we are teaching and less about what we are teaching. Because they're not going to, right? So they're not going to get math skills or science skills or English or any kind of skills unless they are safe and loved inside of your room.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is so masterful that you just discussed, and I talk about this too, you lose so much power as an educator if that kid throws that pencil across the room. You go and get somebody else to address the behavior. Now they know that you're not the authority figure. I don't have to see you as the authority figure. I now have to see somebody else. And I love what you said because you talked about, hey, I'm not the friend. I love you. I have high expectations for you. but I also hold you accountable. It's possible to love really, really hard, but also have discipline as well, because they have to have structure if they're going to be successful in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's really important. And the thing is, they don't want to not they don't necessarily want to get out of my class. We're going to do something cool. We're going to have debates and we're going to have Socratic seminars, and I'm going to stage my room in a way that's really cool one day, and then it's going to look different the next day, and it's just I'm going to work really really hard. So if I kick you out, you don't want to miss it. And so they're usually on their best behavior because they don't want to miss the four corners debate we're about to do, or the, do professional athletes make too much money? Do teachers deserve more money? Like all of this. I mean, it's like higher level thinking, but it's super fun. And it's so different than some of their other classes because they're sitting in straight rows and working on a worksheet. And that's not how I roll.
I had a VP tell me one time, I was working at the University in Arizona, and we were revamping our entire training department. And he said something that I didn't like at the time. And he said, if they're not engaged, you're not engaging. And I was like, wait, no, what do you mean? That's on them. No, he said, if they're not engaged, if they would much rather be on their phone, if they would much rather have their head in the clouds, that's an indictment on you. And I was in higher education before I went into the classroom, and that's something that stuck with me. If there's ever a moment in a time to where that student is not engaged, even in my presentation, if they're not engaged, there's something that I'm not doing right. And the fact that you said, hey, I'm going to build my classroom on engagement, I already know your kids were having an amazing time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the best thing you can hear is like, it's already time to go. Like, what are we doing tomorrow?" Like, and I love that. And I know we have kids who are addicted to their phones, and I know that we are battling the TikTok and the going up against, but that is who we teach today. So what can you do in your classrooms to make sure that engagement is up here? And some of it's been trial and error. I have planned a lesson I thought was going to be amazing, and I'll fall straight up on my face. Like, but I had to do it. I had to try. And over the years, I've learned what works. I've learned what doesn't. I think that's what master teachers do, is that they try new things and they fail, and then they try something else, and instead of just being like, sit in straight rows, here's your shut up sheet. That's what I call worksheets. And that's what we're going to do, and blah. And I just think that that's our kids just deserve so much more than that.
Talk to me about love. You said by the end of the year, there's going to be this heartstring, this string between your heart and mind. You're going to love them. I oftentimes talk about the Five Love Languages book when I do professional development, and why that's so important, to like really desire to love a student. And I think that what you've just mentioned is so important, to connection. It's so important to a sense of belonging, and it's so important to your job ultimately being easier for you. You don't have to pull them if they're running with you. So tell me a little bit about like your approach, and why did you desire to love your students?
Well, I mean, I think that's the only way real true learning happens. Like real true like transformation inside of your class. Like they might know how to do four times four. And I'm an English teacher. And so I give them choice, and I wrap curriculum around things that matter to them. And they know that I care. They know I care. And, you know, by second semester, my kids are just doing great and they don't want to leave. I got an email. It was actually a DM on Facebook, Instagram, and it was from a girl who I had the privilege of having 2 years in a row. So I had her in seventh grade and I had her in eighth. So I got to loop up with this special group. And now she's graduated and she's in college. And she messaged me this long, like, I just want to let you know that your classroom and your presence is the reason have decided to major in education and become an English teacher. I'm like, oh my God. Like I told her, I was like, oh. So, I mean, I think that's the goal, right? When they think of you 15 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, what do they think of? Do they think of those experiences that you created for them that last a lifetime? And I get that all the time from my students. Like, remember when we did poetry lounge? Remember when we did slam poetry? Remember when we, did this, that, and they remember it always.
What role do you think vision plays in your ability to do that? Because you have sight, which is what you see, but then you have vision, which is what you develop as the place that you're trying to get them to, or what they can become. Um, what was your vision like at times for students that were so presently different than the place that you were designed for them to be?
It's hard. It's really hard because you can see, like, I can see your potential, but you're refusing. And like you said, you were raised in this, you would come to school not ready to learn because you had had all of this trauma, and maybe your teachers knew about it, maybe they didn't. And so then you said before we started recording that you were labeled a bad kid, and then that followed you. And I think that it can be really hard when you're looking at this kid like, and I tell teachers, I'm like, sometimes you can love them today, and maybe the teacher next year can teach them because you loved them first. So, I think proximity is really important because kids, especially at first, are going to show out for friends. They are not loyal to you yet. So, if I've got a kid acting foolish, I can, bend down and be like, what's up? Have I like offended you in some way today? Because and they're like, you love us too much for this. Like, I know. And they say they're like, they roll their eyes or they're whatever, but they remember it. And so that's what I say to teachers. Like, sometimes there are issues and things that are happening in a kid's life in that year that you have them, that you can love them today so somebody else can teach them tomorrow. And that's why I think we need each other, and we need to be relying on each other.
Well, I've already said this. I don't know how many times. I think you're absolutely amazing, and I think your voice and your message is so vital to the future of education. So many people need to hear what you have to share, and I think a lot of our educators need a Miss Katie in their life that is able to love on them, but also able to guide them to persistence, because we don't have educators, where are we headed? And so, one thing I did want to ask is that, what do you think is necessary for us as an education system? Like, what do you see as, how can we remain resilient, and how can we continue to move forward with the present circumstances that we have?
I talk about the three hills to die on. I mean, like, overall, do we need to fund public education? Do we need to fund education? Yes. But sometimes we can't die on that hill because we can vote, we can yell into our pillows, but we may or may not have the funding the next year. So that can burn somebody out if you start to spin out about things that you can't control. The district wants you to fill out these forms, they're a requirement. We don't know why. So if you fuss about that and you get all upset and worked up, and that's not something you can control, fill out the forms, turn them in. Like, what can you control? What's inside of your four walls? Those three hills. Your classroom's safe. You have engaging, relevant lesson plans, and you teach your kids how to speak and be kind. And so if you're dying on those three hills, and those are the three hills I'm willing to die on because I can control them. And I'm social justice. Like, I feel like I want to burn things down sometimes. I get it. And my dad, who was a All-American catcher at the University of Arkansas, quite the athlete, he would say to me all the time growing up, like, he would hold up this circle of influence. He'd be like, you can't control what you're talking about right now. And still, as an adult, as a 42-year-old, I'm like, okay, circle of influence. And what can I control? And so I think our teachers need to know that. I think they need the training and the support. I think they need professional development that actually identifies what the issue is, and here are real strategies you can use tomorrow. And that's what we need to give those teachers.
I agree 100%. This has been so amazing. I have this one question that I end our segments on that I want to ask you, and the segment is called "Better Days Ahead." And whether it's a mantra, whether it's words of wisdom, advice, whatever you would like to call it, what would you share with somebody that's listening to this, just to encourage them that there are better days ahead?
Absolutely. I think showing up. I think I think there's a quote, and I don't remember who said it. Give accurate credit where credit is due, but it's sometimes courage isn't a loud roar, but it is a quiet, I'm going to try again tomorrow. And I feel that way a lot of times coming home. We'll have a rough day. We had, this was several years ago, but we had like 7 fights in one day that ended with parents fighting in the parking lot, and like police. And I mean, it was just, I wanted to put my head in my hands and cry and just be done. And I think I did cry, and I went home and I said that, like, okay, well, I'm going to be there tomorrow. If I'm their person, I'm going to, and we have to remember that.
I love that. I love that. It's a bad day. It's not a bad. Wow. Continue to show up. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. Been absolutely amazing. And I know that so many people are going to get a tremendous amount of value. This is our segment today of mindset on resilience. And for everybody, I like to end our segments on the better days ahead and the advice that we just got. Continue to show up for yourself and show up for those that are around you. But always continue to show up. Thank you all for your time. You have a great day.